So I thought that I was a good ally, but this past month made me realize that I still have a long way to go. Let's talk. I have to be honest, when I looked back at what I read in February in order to do this wrap up video, I realized that I only had one book on my reading list that had anything to do with Black History Month, and that was To Kill a Mockingbird, which isn't even written by a Black author. I think in my mind, I justified it because I do try to uplift marginalized voices all year round. But with everything happening in my country, like the attempt to get rid of Black History Month altogether, I really can't ignore that this was a huge failure on my part. And while I can't fix it, I can say that I am sorry for failing to be a good ally, and that I do want to make a commitment to do better in the future. Since I didn't read that many books this month, I'm going to finish off this wrap up by talking about some of my favorite books written by Black authors, so make sure you stick around to the end. When I finished my TBR last week, I had only finished one book all month, but finishing that video did seem to kind of restore some of my reading vigor. And I actually ended up finishing 6 books in February. And so I'm going to talk about them, talking about the books that I liked from my least favorite book to my favorite book. My least favorite book of the month was Nothing But Blackened Teeth by Cassandra Khaw. This book follows a circle of friends who are staying the night in a haunted mansion in Japan the night before a wedding. This mansion is haunted by a bride ghost and her minions. And as the night progresses, the bride and her minions will get hungry, and not everyone will survive. I really wanted to love this book, and I do have a lot of really good things to say about it. So I in no way want anyone to think that this is a bad book, because it's not. Each character is very distinct, even if I did find most of them insufferable aside from the main character and the funny sidekick. This story absolutely nailed the atmosphere of a horror novel. There were just these little moments where they described things around the manor where I was just like, yep, this place is bad news. Y'all really shouldn't be here. So in that way, I feel like the atmosphere of this story was the highlight of it for me. And the prose were really good. So why is it my lowest rated book of the month? Because it just felt rushed. Normally, I love short form horror stories, but I just wanted more from this. Well, maybe more is the wrong word. I wanted a different focus. The story focused so much on the interpersonal drama of the characters in this house and not enough about what was going on in the house for me. I wanted to find out more about what was going on. However, the final theme about revenge against the patriarchy was amazing. Next up, we have A Captive of Wing and Feather by Melanie Sellier. This is book 5 in the Beyond Four Kingdoms series. Since this is an anthology series, I do feel like I can kind of summarize this book for you. Princess Adelaide ran away from her kingdom, and even when she ends up cursed, that's still not enough for her to want to go back. But when a handsome prince for her past shows up, she and her 7 swans will have to work together with him to save her new home from a dark power that threatens it. Overall, I've really been enjoying this series. All the couples up until this point had really great chemistry, which is why this one kind of fell flat for me. Adelaide and Gabe just didn't have great chemistry on page. However, I do really like how Melanie interprets the Swan Lake story, especially in the magical atmosphere of the lake that she is bound to. I was really enjoying the build of the plot up until the climax, and then it just seemed a little muddled and rushed. But I did love the theme of Adelaide learning to trust again, and that learning to trust wasn't just focused on her romantic interest, but also the people around her. Next up is To Kill a Mockingbird by Harper Lee. Do I really even need to summarize this book? Probably not, but I'm going to. This tells the story of Scout, who is a young girl growing up in the Deep South, and it focuses around her experience during a period of time where her father, Atticus Finch, is trying to defend a young Black man who is accused of a crime he didn't commit. This was one of the few books that I was mandated to read in school that I remember really enjoying. And I will say that that kind of holds true up until today. The characters have a lot of depth, even though Scout really does not come off as her age in her inner monologue. I truly felt like this story was a window into the deep South, especially of that time in the 1930s where it takes place. The prose, of course, are fantastic, but the plot is a little strange for me. It comes off kind of passive because the plot is not really happening to Scout. Scout is an observer of the plot, if that makes sense. And while I did enjoy my experience reading this, I will say it was difficult to see how in almost 100 years of history, not a whole lot has changed. I did find it fascinating, though, if you compare like the foot washers that are mentioned in the story with like what we're seeing with Christian nationalists right now. That's kind of an interesting thing to think about. Sitting at number 3, we have The Flight Girls by Noelle Salazar. This book follows Audrey Coltrane, a WASP pilot during World War II, and it follows her relationship with Lieutenant James Hart throughout the course of the war. The timeline of this book starts right before the bombing of Pearl Harbor and ends shortly after the end of World War II. I absolutely loved the relationship of Audrey and James in this story and how it develops throughout the book. However, I did feel like a lot of the side characters ended up feeling kind of the same. Though I did really love the emphasis on female relationships among the WASP pilots. There was a really interesting kind of contrast between seeing a nation at war and the idea that life goes on even as war continues. However, as I mentioned in my TBR video last week, reading anything that's World War II right now, as my president is currently dismantling every single relationship that came out of the results of that war, is very disheartening. The writing does feel as if you are in Audrey's head, and as someone who likes close point of views, I really appreciated that. But I will say the plot of the story feels more like a slice of life plot of this time period rather than a plot, unless you're considering the relationship between Audrey and James as the plot of the story. This book definitely kept me interested in reading, but I can't help but wish that I had gotten a little bit more of the WASPs in action rather than what happened outside of that, which, to be fair, was addressed in an author's note that that was not the point of this novel, but I still wanted it anyway. Overall, I really enjoyed this story about not settling in love and having resilience during difficult times. My runner-up for Best Book of the Month was A Dream of Ebony and White by Melanie Sellier. When Snow's father dies, she ends up fleeing for her life from her stepmother. She's aided by her childhood friend, the huntsman Alexander, and when they get separated in the forest, she ends up in a cottage, and she will have to figure out if she has what it takes to win back her country from her stepmother. This book by far has been my favorite of the Beyond Four Kingdoms series, and it's book 4 in the series. I think that's largely because it's a friends to lovers story, and I love friends to lovers, but really, Snow and Alex really did have very good chemistry on page. I also really liked all of the side characters in this story. They all felt individual and real. And one of the things I think I really like about this series is the world building of this is a world that has fallen into darkness because love no longer reigns, and that has caused the godmothers to just disappear and no longer be helping. And how that plays out in this story in particular is really well done. This is also probably my favorite because it has the most political intrigue of any of the other stories, and I love some political intrigue. Overall, I think this is a great story about reclaiming your power through action and about learning to accept help when you need it. And my favorite book of the month was The Exiled Queen by Cinda Williams Chima. This is the second book in the Seven Realms series, so in order to avoid spoilers, I won't summarize it for you. I've been really interested in this series since book 1, but I will say this book is what sold me to finish the series. I love all of the characters, especially Han and Reza. And in the first book, we were following a lot of the characters on their individual paths, but in this book, those paths start to converge. My only real complaint about it is that something big happened to Han at the end of the first book, and I don't think that that was really given the attention it deserves in the second book. It was mentioned, but we never really saw Han dealing with it. The pacing of this book did feel a little bit slower, but I was okay with that because this was the book where we're starting to build like the interconnected relationships because their paths have converged. But it does pick up once the individual mysteries that are introduced in this book are revealed. So yeah, I'm excited to read book 3. All right, so that's what I read in February. And I know that while this next part doesn't make up for my kind of thoughtless actions, I still want to do it anyway. And that's because I do believe in taking accountability for my actions. So I've picked 4 of my favorite books from different genres by Black authors. If you enjoy thrillers, I absolutely loved Razorblade Tears by S.A. Cosby. When Ike and Buddy Lee's sons are murdered for being gay, they team up to find their son's killers because they are determined to do better by their sons in death than they did in life. And through their journey of vengeance, these 2 fathers will have to come to terms not just with their prejudices against their sons, but against each other as well. I read this book the year it came out and absolutely loved it. The characters are so well developed and feel like real people, and their journey about acceptance, not just of each other, but for their sons as well, is really well developed and beautiful and heartbreaking. While I prefer to read books about marginalized community joy instead of trauma, I still think that this book is worth a read. If you enjoy YA fantasy, you should read Legendborn by Tracy Deonn. After her mother passes away, Bree joins a residential program at UNC Chapel Hill. While there, she witnesses something strange, a demon that is flying. And when a young sorcerer tries to wipe her memory of the event, it backfires and actually awakens a power that she didn't know that she had. And she will then join the ranks of a secret society known as the Legendborn, a society that hunts demons. As an NC resident, I kind of love that this takes place at Chapel Hill. The setting just felt very intimate and familiar to me. Even though I haven't spent that much time there, I have been there, and that was pretty cool. I think this also tells a really great story about what it's like to be a Black person in a white-dominated space. And now's the perfect time to catch up on books 1 and 2 because book 3 releases, I think, actually the day I'm releasing this video on March 4th. If you're looking for something for your younger middle grade readers, try Root Magic by Eden Royce. This is about Jezebel and Jay Turner, 2 fraternal twins who live in South Carolina in 1963. Their grandmother has just passed away, and they're about to start school at an integrated school for the first time, but not before their uncle teaches them root magic, an African-American folk magic that has been practiced by their family for generations. When evil, both natural and supernatural, come to their town, Jezebel will need all the power that she can get to defeat it. This book is just so rich, and it helped me understand certain things about living here in the South that, as someone who grew up in the North, I just didn't know. Why are a lot of ceilings on front porches painted this light turquoise blue? This book does deal with heavier topics, even though it is middle grade, but it does it in a way that I feel is really age appropriate. And if you're a fan of nonfiction, might I suggest Dear Ijeowele, or A Feminist Manifesto in 15 Suggestions by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. Chimamanda is an award-winning author. A few years ago, before this book came out, a friend of hers wrote her asking how to raise their daughter to be a feminist, and this book is her response. While this book does specifically focus on how to be feminist as a Black woman, The advice applies here to anyone who wants to raise their daughter to understand sexual politics in the 21st century and what it means to be a woman. What are your favorite books written by Black authors? Let me know in the comments. In my very first Freedom segment, here are some of the bills that I want to talk about. For an update on Oklahoma State Bill 593, it is still currently awaiting review by the Senate Judiciary Committee, so it's not too late to contact your representatives. And of course, I'll put the link to look up your representatives down below. Funnily enough, the day I posted my video about Oklahoma SB 593, I found out that a similar bill has been proposed in North Carolina, where I live. And that bill is North Carolina House Bill 83. While not as severe as Oklahoma SB 593, it's still pretty bad. Basically, the law states that I could be put on the sex offenders list for giving someone under 16 Fourth Wing to read. And I could be charged with a felony if that minor is under the age of 13. My sister-in-law allowed my niece, who was 12 at the time, to read Fourth Ring. I don't think she deserves jail time for that. My mother gave me my first open-door romance when I was 14 because I had questions and she thought I would legitimately like the story outside of the very little amount of spice that there was. I don't think she deserves to be put on the sex offenders list for that. Not to mention that this bill is almost impossible to enforce in libraries, bookstores, and little libraries that might even be on your very own property. While I think the intentions of this bill were good, the ramifications about bills like this just aren't thought all the way through. And if they were thought all the way through, then they're just un-American. As of right now, this bill was referred to the Judiciary Committee, but then it was withdrawn and resubmitted to Judiciary Committee 2. I think that largely is because that committee may be more favorable towards this bill. But you can bet I'm gonna contact my House representatives about this one. Passing censorship in the guise of child protection is just infuriating. My sister-in-law knows what her children can handle. My mom knew what I could handle. We don't need the government to do it for us. Again, I'd support a rating sticker on the back cover of a book. That way it would be easy for a parent to turn over the book and be like, no, you cannot read this. That's honestly fine by me. But bills like this just aren't enforceable, and the punishment is far worse than the crime. So those are the two bills that have really been on my radar. Do you have any bills that you want me to cover, or do you know of any challenges that I should mention? Let me know. Let's see what stories tomorrow brings.